So there is this word called Tzimtzum in Hebrew, or Lashon HaKodesh, and in the Tanya teaching and the Jewish teaching about the contraction. So God contracting itself, consciousness, life, universal power, contracting itself to be able to fit in smaller and smaller vessels until it could be absorbed, received. You could think of this idea of like making almond milk, lahavda, like with full separation. We're thinking of this idea like you have to like contract the particles of the nut until it could be like with liquid, like infusing the liquid. So it's like each time you go through, first you're like cutting them, and then you're chopping them, then you're grinding them in the blender, then you're like mixing them with the water, then you're like going through a cheesecloth, and finally you get this milk from it. But you can't drink an almond. You could chew it, right? You can't get that liquid from it based on this way that we described. So, or like a butter, like making a butter, you add some oil, or some you could actually make a butter out of it if it's long enough. Special machines where it goes around and around and around until it becomes creamy, and instead of like a nutty paste. And so yeah, like paste and butter, and like, so this idea that things, you know, can fit through smaller and smaller holes to be received by a sensor. Oh, someone came to smoke. Can't move now. So someone told me once, smoking is like a peeing section at the pool. Everybody around has to breathe it in. Everyone in the pool has to swim in your pee. Okay. So yeah, so Tzimtzum is like a way to make it smaller and more, call it bite-sized pieces or tiny pieces. Like there's a grain is separated from the chaff. And so we have different uses for different things. They have to fit through different size hole. Then it has to be smaller. So this idea of Tzimtzum is contracting itself enough so that it could fit in something that doesn't have the same capacity or is not as extensive and or expansive. So then we have Tzimtzum within ourself, which is a self-identity, self-concept, self-image, self-persona. We have idea to concept to form to actual. Thinking of substance to clay to the vessel to the pot. So Atzilut is that it connects to idea, concept is bria, form is yetzira, and actual is asiya. Idea is like very close, like you say the idea of grace. Then you have the concept, you have soft gaze is grace. Then we have form, we have like the eye, like the vision itself, like a peripheral vision. And then we could say the actual, which is like being seen, which is not being scrutinized or ignored. So you can take this into any program and match it. So it's really not about seeing just the face value. There's an essence, there's a root. And when we look at negative and positive as an emitter and as something that sucks it in, like a vacuum of energy, and it is related to the valence electrons, we know spiritually the negative can take in negative or positive, which is we're not talking here about magnetic or electric. So magnet, positive, negative, and electric, we call them ions, or also you could call it positive, negative. There's electromagnetic poles. So, you know, there's being one or the other. But with negative, positive, and spirituality, we have something called klipas noga. It's like a neutral. It's in its potential state. It can be positive or negative. And this is where the negative can take a positive or a negative. So this thing of like -1 with a -1 becomes -1 plus -1, you would get -2. -1 plus 1, you would get 0. So something like working where you can either go above the 0 line or under the 0 line. It's things that could be good, could be toxic or tonic. Everything from food, sleep, sex, and so on. There's a few things related to the word in Hebrew, which is called like hallow. So it's interesting. Today's actually Halloween, and this idea in Hebrew we say hallowed is like Shabbos. Shabbos hallowed out. It's like took away the potential for anything negative. So it becomes hallowed. So it becomes, this idea of Tzimtzum is that God hollows itself out to make space for a seeing, a selfing, a being, something to emit itself, like a cell that has a charged exterior wall to attract negative, positive energy. The more of ourself that is in the internal field, the more negative, and the more of God we allow in through the channels, which is like through our rituals, our mitzvah commandments, spiritually or with exercise or sun or physically. The idea is really that the more positive the inside becomes, it leads to less of a need or a hunger, the less negative on the inside. So imagining this big positive field, and then how could some positive entity have an existence if it's just going to be absorbed into the field? So it has to have this negatively charged wall, and in this negatively charged wall, the inside could actually become negative. Now, if the inside is positive, it can still exist with a negative charged wall, so that it exists in this positive space as its own self. So it's like we get to experience being the emanator. We get to experience that being we get to experience being a positive field. If we're not empty and hungry, needy, lacking, like the vacuum energy sucking in, we could experience releasing out, because there's that negative edge, and there could be a negative polarity around us as well. So we are also interacting with other entities as far as we know, although there have been some teachers who say that there is no other entity. There's no other charged cell out there. It's just our imagination, our projections. But actually, if we are dealing with other negative charged entities, they may be very positive inside, or they may be negative. That would be an example of where we are the emanator or the receiver, the emitter, or the, I don't want to call it sucker, because sucker sounds like a loser, but like, or we are the vacuumer. And this is a way that we can relate to God, speaking about grace. But we do, God being the positive field, but we do experience separation while in our bodies that aren't one with other bodies because of that negatively charged edge. So that would be, in other words, we have a conflict of interest, which does not allow for inner peace. With conflict of interest, you have a polarity. You have, I want this and I also want this, and there's some tension where there's like a negative space between two positives, emitting over here, and then having a space, or two negatives and a positive in the middle. I want in over here, I want something in me over there, and then in the middle is positive. And then there's a lot of ways in which people do it. So there's 4 different worlds we talked about, the multiverse, and these 4 layers of the worlds. And they're actually also taught in Kabbalah that they're not only 4 worlds, they're just categorized into 4 major categories, but actually they overlap, and there's very nuanced gradations between them. So fire and air signs are like the upper heavenly water, and the earth and water signs are like the lower earthly water. And we could say my. These are like my, or these are like yours. Each one has their own. And in terms of this hallowing I mentioned, it's like this idea of the grave. Like there's gravity. We have the grave is in the burial. The grave is serious, and grave is penetrated into. So there's this sense of these channels, like we know with our cells, that they have gated channels, there's ionic channels, there's specifically like almost like enzyme, like something clicks in, like lock and key, kind of like for the gated, I guess it's similar. There's different kinds of gated channels, in other words. And so if we have this upper and lower waters, we think about what is living in the waters. So each we each come from one of the 4 different worlds according to the Tanya. And so somebody might be from the upper heavenly waters or from the lower earthly waters, and it does not mean one is higher or lower. It just means, are you looking up at the world from the belly of the whale, or are you looking from on top and seeing down into the world? And it doesn't mean that you are not of the world. It just means from which direction. Are you under looking up, or are you above looking down, sort of like the bird's eye view, or from the underbelly? And this is why people say, like, kind of like this idea that someone could be observing something that you would need to see. If you were taller, you could see over it, and if you were shorter, you could see under it. So we do need, it's like puzzle views, like puzzle perspectives. This is, if we would not be attached and invested in what people were saying, we would be able to hear clearly that they're talking from a different angle. and could be of value. So, however, not feeling like part of the puzzle, the different frequency, is like not finding people who communicate with your frequency. If somebody is always seeing things from a certain perspective and everybody sees from a different perspective, they're going to feel they don't belong. And I think of this whale that they talked about called the 52 hertz whale, and it sang a different tune than all the other whales that were near it, and I still don't know if there's actually any group of whales that sing in its tune. Someone's calling, 1 second. Okay, continuing. I still don't know if there's any group of whales that do sing in the 52 hertz tune. So it never found its mate. And then I think, that what that reminds me of is actually the Levyasan, the story of the Levyasan, which is when Hashem killed the female so they would not destroy the world, and says that if they would be together in the time, they would have destroyed the world. It's like, I can't tell if that's because of its destruction capability or if it's because it is so big. So if they would mate, then they would not be able to, they would destroy the world. So in the times of Mashiach, the righteous will get a peace. It's been like preserved. And in a previous video, I spoke about salt in the last video. So some say it was like in the salt. So what's this idea is that people are familiar with the scapegoat, where everybody takes a bite out of, the opposite. Everybody dumps onto you whatever they don't want. They send you off to be consumed. You're like the one which has to take on what nobody in the family likes about themselves, or the boss, or just basically people project on you whatever it is that they would like to make themselves more comfortable or at ease or have clarity in some way. And Levyasan is kind of the opposite. Everyone gets to take a bite out of you. So this idea that at the time of the Messianic time, the righteous will all get a piece of in the Messianic time of the Levyasan. And since we're what we are what we eat, the Levyasan can't be that bad, even though there's mixed interpretations of whether the Levyasan is a righteous or wicked entity. And there was also at the Messianic time, so it's like a big whale. There's also going to be a shorabor, which is like a big ox, and a shorabor is like one of a kind and will feed the righteous as well, like the Levyasan. So the wicked won't consume it. And so this Levyasan is like kind of like the opposite of scapegoat, where let's say you did well on a test, someone comes and takes a bite out of it. No, it's because I helped you study, or because your parents tell you because we're smart, and so on and so forth. Like, you basically, everyone takes a bite out of you till there's nothing left. And any more on this topic? I think we are almost done. This idea. Okay, so let's say this positive negative charge. So let's say someone has negative inside. They cannot be a provider. So think of fathers, husbands. I think of my own father, and certain men. So it's like not being a provider for the wife and kids, but instead looking like needing the people around you to be the scapegoat, the Levyasan. So in other words, wanting to blame or punish basically what or who he wanted or needed at that moment. And so I hate to break it, but because this is something that we can inherit, we can become like that. So we have to actively become positive. It's like if our autopilot is going to be negative. Now, even people who are raised in the environment where there is positive energy being shared, there is no guarantee that they'll stay that way in the world, because it requires this sense of, this inner private world is like beyond the negative charge. It's literally that nobody could get past it. Nobody can actually penetrate into your world unless you like specifically give them the key, or open the door for them. So because they're coming from their own inner world, and you have an external outer wall of like a cell that has a negative charge, however, and it could repel anything. However, it could also be, if you're very vulnerable and you have a negative inside, you will be trying to get past the negative outside to have negative inside, and then there'll be like this edge, this like husk, this shell, and you will allow others to get in, and it will be a vulnerability, because now you could let anything in. And if something negative gets inside of the cell somehow, it could cause the cell to be destroyed or ruined, and say they like become consumed with themselves, consumed with something that is not their real self, something that destroys them from the inside out. And or we say they're a shell of who they used to be, for example. So we have to appreciate our mysteries. We can't walk around feeling like our mysteries are not appreciated. And our knowledge of deep and high, remember, they're from the underbelly or from the above, spiritual truths, in a world where, you know, it might be that, like, I think of people around me, like baking bread or driving cars, like, you might feel like, you know, this negative shell which lives in this world has to be taken good care of. Otherwise, it could become vulnerable if we're not getting enough right food, sleeping. We don't have access to getting around, transportation, or eating the right bread is like healthy. Like maybe our words don't have anything to offer. But unfortunately, if there's this pathology which happens, which is that we think we're at a frequency that no one else is, or we think that we always have a different view, or we become consumed with ourselves, we now see what that happens to a very large scale of people, where this is like a spiritual bedbug. Like I had a friend who called it a negatron, which is like through this negative gate it comes in, and it causes a person to then have behaviors of people like, oh, they're narcissistic, or there's such a negative space inside of them that it appears on the outside to people who are looking to them for something. If you're not looking to anyone for anything, even though we are told that we should be interdependent, which means we are not codependent, not independent. There's this new word, interdependent, not that new. But it is, in a way, the one who calls others narcissistic is often also exhibiting this narcissistic behavior, because the person who needs to be in power over another person is the one who doesn't have something inside. So to need someone else to have something inside in order to be okay is this leftover sort of this idea that if they were better, wouldn't you be trying to take a bite out of them if they had the thing that you wanted them to offer? So the psyche itself, if we say that something gets inside of it, it's called psychopathology, and then we say someone is a psychopath. The psyche, and we're going to stop with this topic, is as we say, being hollowed out, is on its own able to regulate and bounce back. And this is if we maintain our borders and our negative edge. This negative edge that can be used for positive or negative. And this requires us to be very conscious of what's inside of us, and in order to fit through different spaces, and the idea that we will understand God if we fit through the eye of the needle. We'll be able to relate to God, not understand God. We'll be able to be understood, to feel understood by God, to feel known, to feel seen. This is being able to fit through a tiny place. We could make ourselves so small. This is the healing of psychopathology and narcissism, to be able to hollow, and just kind of fit through. And this is a way for the cell, even if most of it is cut off and just a tiny bit can exist, it could regenerate over and over and over. And I'm not going to be recording a video tomorrow. This is for tomorrow because I am working from early. So I wish everybody a good Shabbos. It's Parshas Noach. It's when Noah builds an ark. The animals come live with him, and the world is regenerated. So it's kind of on the theme. And so I wish everybody regeneration. Wish everybody protection, immunity, preservation, not needing anyone else to be the narcissist, the leviathan, the psychopath, the scapegoat, and instead filling up and emitting positive energy until it's one big positive field. And then the prophecies are that the whole world will know God. We could say the whole world will know positivity. There won't be those negative charges. There will be a constant emission of positive charge. The negative charge would literally be the place where positive charge is being emitted. So that could be when we don't communicate as toxic positivity or what's called spiritual bypassing, but rather we maintain this underbelly and this looking from above versions of ourself as a whole. All the best. Bye.